All right, good evening. My name is Ben Nelson. I'm a project manager at the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers St. Paul District. We're here tonight to talk about the Minnesota River Bank Stabilization Habitat Rehabilitation and Enhancement Project. We're going to talk about the project, but also the environmental assessment and feasibility report that goes along with it. It's a brief presentation, maybe 20 minutes, and then we can open it up for questions afterwards. This project is part of the Upper Mississippi River Restoration Program, or UMRR. UMRR goes back to 1986, so it's been around for about 40 years. There's been about over 60 projects completed up and down the Mississippi River and including on the Minnesota River. And this has helped restore tens of thousands of acres of habitat across these 5 states: Minnesota, Iowa, Wisconsin, Illinois, Missouri, as seen on the map here. One of the main components of the UMRR program is the Habitat Rehabilitation and Enhancement Projects, or HREPs. These were authorized to plan, construct, and evaluate measures for fish and wildlife habitat. And that was part of the original authorization back in 1986, and still what authorizes the project to this day. You can see at the bottom here, there are lots of partners as part of this project. We have state and federal agencies, but we also have the input from public and non-governmental organizations and just stakeholders throughout the 5-state area. To start the project, we went off of a fact sheet. So under UMRR, the fact sheet identifies problem and projects. And this fact sheet, developed in 2020, identified bank line erosion as a contributing factor to the decline in habitat quality. So sediment entering the system and just an overall decline in habitat based on erosion. So the fact sheet identified the need for projects that would fix bank stabilization along natural levees in the Minnesota River and the Mississippi Rivers pools 4 through 11. This project today we're talking about is on the lower Minnesota River, so it's specific to that area. The typical HREP timeline goes through planning or feasibility, design, which would be developing the plans and specifications, and then all the way to construction. So that depends on the funding throughout the project, because this can take several years to go from planning to design to construction. These projects are 100% federally funded a lot of times, and that means that the funding depends on the congressional authorization. Currently, we have a number of projects that are either in planning, design, or construction. As you can see here, up and down the river. All of these projects listed here are on U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service refuge land. So U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is the sponsor, and then these are 100% federally funded under the UMRR program. Looking more specifically at the study area for this project, if we narrow in, this is about 15 miles southwest of here at the Visitor Center. So this is part of the Minnesota Valley National Wildlife Refuge near Shakopee, Minnesota. If you're looking here, this is on the river moving this way. So this is on the right descending bank, we'd say, or on the south side of the river. So if you look, zooming in, it's near Savage, Minnesota, to orient yourself. This is also the area of a previous HREP project that was constructed in 2022. The feasibility for that began in 2019, and construction was completed in 2022. That project we call Bass Ponds Marsh and Wetland HREP, and that built water management structures to manage the water levels in the marsh in this area. So you can see these diamond shapes being the water control structures and some other features that help manage the water levels throughout here through this interconnected system. a different look at that same area. So this would be the Bass Ponds A-Trap area. And then zooming into where we're talking about, this is the study area. This yellow along the river here, and that's focused specifically on the bank, about 1,200 feet. And then right behind that bank is the Continental Grain Marsh area. So this is kind of zooming in more specifically to our project in reference to the Bass Ponds project from a few years ago. And here's Highway 169 for reference. Like I said, this is the river's moving this way downstream. The team identified three main problems when looking at this project and in the beginning planning phases. We looked at the erosion being a threat to the adjacent land and impacting the integrity of the marsh. The erosion threatening the ability to manage the water levels within that Continental Grain Marsh area, which was one of the points of developing that Bass Ponds project. And then, of course, the erosion contributing to sediment in the Minnesota and Mississippi rivers downstream. With the problems, we developed objectives, two main objectives of restoring, protecting, maintaining the integrity of the Continental Grain Marsh, and then also restoring, protecting, and maintaining the riverbank and the riparian plant communities of the Refuge unit. We also wanted to provide a buffer against future flooding and flooding that can inundate on both sides of the bank here. An opportunity is something that we see could enhance the project. So in addition to the objectives, a way that the project could be enhanced, we identified a few things there, like implementing more natural stabilization techniques for native vegetation and plant diversity, increasing the project resiliency. We're worried about erosion, so we want to make sure that this holds up. And then implementing more natural stabilization techniques that allow for wildlife access. Once we developed identified the problems, developed objectives and opportunities, we started initial development with a kickoff meeting, some site visits. We were able to get out to the site and we noticed some sloughing, or where the bank is falling off, or the soil is falling off the bank. You can see the trees even falling off, or just the material falling off the bank, the whole soil. And then also rill erosion, where like surface water would cause channels through the bank. So this is, several spots along the bank where we saw significant erosion to be addressed. We identified about a 1,200 foot stretch to protect some of the areas of the Continental Grain Marsh that we had identified. Also, this is mostly between U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We have been working with Minnesota DNR, but they deferred to U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on the refuge lands. With that, we developed a number of measures to group into alternatives. The measures included like resloping the bank, widening the top of the natural levee, revegetation, erosion measures, and revetment, or placing riprap or rock along the bank. We did screen out measures like that were more engineered or higher cost, or would not be as effective, or would not meet our objectives or opportunities. These measures would be like a launchable rock toe, veins, a rock berm, or articulated concrete blocks, or methods like that. With those measures, we grouped them into alternatives. We had 4 alternatives. The first alternative was the no action alternative, where no measures are done. Alternative 2 was full rock revetment or full riprap. That would include the resloping, the natural levee widening, the vegetation, and those measures, but just completely rock revetment or riprap along the bank. Then we looked at alternative 4, which is buried revetment. This would be soil-filled riprap or soil in between the voids and gaps of the rocks of riprap. So if you're familiar with riprap or rock placement, you'll sometimes see the space in between as the rocks lock together. So this would be a method of placing the soil in there, in the voids, while you're doing the work. Then we looked at alternative 3, which was actually a hybrid of alternative 2 and 4. Alternative 3 was buried revetment for about a third of the middle section, and then regular riprap or rock revetment on the upstream and downstream ends. Here's maybe a little bit better way to explain the difference between the revetment and the buried revetment. Alternative 2 being the revetment. So you have, this is the eroded bank, and then you're resloping and reshaping that. Then you place layers of rock, you have bedding, and then riprap down into the water as well. So that protects the bank, is very secure, and you can revegetate at the top of this widened levee top of bank. Then you have alternative 4, which is buried revetment. Buried revetment would have similar concepts, but you would also then, above the water surface elevation or the average water level, you would then also place the soil-filled riprap or the buried revetment. So that's rock with soil in the voids. And then you have topsoil placed on top of that, ultimately with the goal of them being able to place, to grow vegetation over a wider area. And then of course, alternative 3 combines both of these methods at different sections. When we go through the planning process, we identify a tentatively selected plan. So what we're planning on implementing tentatively. For this project was alternative 3, which is the hybrid. We thought that it met the objectives of restoring and protecting the marsh, restoring and protecting the riverbank and the plant communities, and then also buffering against future floods. We also thought there were benefits in stopping the erosion along the area, protecting the bass prawns project, and that it also used techniques that could establish more vegetation through the buried revetment. The other thing was we wanted this to be resilient, and this has some more reasonable maintenance costs than some of the other alternatives. And this was something that we worked with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service as a sponsor on this alternative as well, and on all the alternatives. But this is what we have in the feasibility report, environmental assessment, as our tentatively selected plan. Zooming in, a little bit more detail on the design so far. This is very preliminary, and we'll get further, like I said, once we get into the design phase. But some things to note, this pink area, or these additional lines, would be the buried revetment footprint in the middle. And then you'd have the revetment footprint on the outside. This area would be below the water line, so that would just be the rock revetment. And then we also did include these about 50-foot sections with stone or smaller stone to fill in the gaps on the surface. And so this would be for wildlife access, and so that turtles or other wildlife could get across the riprap easier. And then again, you see, zooming in, this is the marsh area, the river, of course, and then these are kind of the ends of the project. This is a bass ponds feature as well on one end to protect, and then there are some bass ponds project features over here as well. We have sent out letters under Section 106 National Historic Preservation Act for cultural resources and tribal coordination. And we do plan to do some surveys. We have a programmatic agreement right now, but this summer we'll get out and do some more surveys and make sure that we're covered for compliance with Section 106. When we talk about the report, like I said, there's two components to it, or two pieces. There's the draft feasibility report, and it's also integrated with the environmental assessment. So the feasibility report is part of our Corps of Engineers planning processes, and then the environmental assessment is for National Environmental Policy Act documentation. With that, we have the draft report that we released on May 13th, and please provide comments by May 13th, and provide comments by June 15th on the document. A couple things to point out. The main report. These are the different sections that might be relevant as you're looking through. But the study area in section 1, the goals and objectives in section 2, the alternatives in section 3, and then the evaluation comparison, the tentatively selected plan, and the analysis in 4, 5, and 6. And then section 7 is where we'll talk about this public meeting and other outreach and communication and engagement. And then section 8 will ultimately be our recommendation. And so that will be part of the final report where we decide if, say, yes, we are going to move forward with alternative 3, or if we're going to do something different. That'll be in our recommendation section. We also have a number of appendices. Most of these are specific to the disciplines or different topics by the disciplines from the team. One thing to note is Appendix A. So Appendix A is the correspondence and coordination that would have the tribal letters, that would have information about this public meeting, future communications, things like that, as we get that information. So if you submit a comment, in email, that would go into Appendix A. One thing to note on the National Environmental Policy Act, this is something that requires federal agencies to assess the environmental effects of a proposed action and to develop a document before making a decision. The NEPA documents are so that the agencies can make better informed decisions and so that we can inform the public and provide for review and comment. One thing to note is public comments on a draft report, that they're not for voting yay or nay. They should be clear, concise, and relevant. So this is where you could make an effective comment by saying, here's a solution, here's something you didn't consider, here's a method of analysis, or maybe even a factual error, or say, we think that you should consider this alternative. Those are the type of comments that are effective NEPA comments. The overall schedule, we have the draft report out now. The public meeting is today, May 27th. And then we would be looking to have the final report and the report approval later this year, towards the end of 2026. Once again, June 15th for providing comments. You can send them to our office in St. Paul. You can provide them via email at cemvp_planning@usace.army.mil. You can also sign up for email lists to get updates on the project. And then, of course, there's the sign-in sheet or providing a comment card. One thing to note, if you sign up, we love to have your contact information if you want to be kept abreast of the project, but we'll try to keep your information out of public documents, but just note that if you're providing an email address or information that it might be part of the record. So just provide what you're comfortable with and what you want us to know to get a hold of you, but just something to be aware of and note. Once again, June 15th for any comments that you have on the document. And I think that's all I had for tonight, so thank you.